Well, welcome to Ravi Mehta, executive, a long list of things here, which are all very impressive. So, executive and residence at Reforge, previously chief product officer at Tinder, currently product director at Facebook, previously TripAdvisor at Xbox. You could insert a load of other really world-class companies or products in there. And I think it's fairly safe to say that when it comes to product, you probably know your stuff. It's somebody to listen to, particularly when it comes to product leadership. So I suppose the first question to kick us off, Ravi, would be, what does product leadership mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think it's a term that's sort of coming into place more in the last couple of years. Product management is an interesting field. I think because it is a leadership field from the very start. Product managers are expected to lead across their organization, right from an associate PM role, and then over time they take on additional leadership responsibilities. But there's an interesting question of what exactly does that mean to take on additional leadership responsibilities? And typically what people think of is they think of, PMs start to manage their own teams. And so, product managers become product leaders when they start to have a team of 2 or 3 people that they're managing, and they're managing a broader scope of work as a result of that. I think there's some more nuance to that. That is definitely part of it. So as part of taking on a broader span of scope within an organization, PMs will start to lead teams. But I think there's a deeper set of leadership traits and capabilities that product leaders really need to think about developing and contribute to their organization. I think they largely have to do around 2 things. The first one is influencing people, and not just influencing people from the perspective of managing a team, but also getting better at stakeholder management, particularly getting better at managing up. And then the second thing is to get better at product strategy. So initially, product managers are really focused on how do I conceptualize, build, iterate on a particular product feature. And product leaders start to think about features rather than being independent things, think about them as a string of things that they have to work on together to ladder up to a company strategy.
Yeah, that makes you touched upon there. I think such an interesting point and such a nuanced point that's hard to pick up for people that are maybe like just moving into product management or a couple of years in, which is this idea of traits as well. I think when we start out, it's very, we tend to think of very tangible, hard skills, particularly more so in Europe, let's say, I think where it's less product driven, ultimately it's about managing velocity, right? Managing tickets, like Scrum, basically project management in a way. And I find it's very interesting with the students I work with that, there's this big focus on these sort of tangible things which ultimately don't matter, but then it's very hard to explain to somebody when they're maybe more junior that as, the more senior they get, the more they have to look at actually these soft skills, what we call soft skills, is, traits, and soft things like influence, right? What is that? And how do you teach that to people without them experiencing it? Really difficult to explain that concept.
The same with strategy. Strategy is another one of these things like influence, which is, to some extent a soft skill, but does have some hard edges to it. Even just defining what strategy is, I think, is an important thing for people to understand what they mean by that and separate it from, mission, which is one thing, goals, which are another thing. Strategy is really about having a very rigorous, well-defined, logical plan for achieving a set of objectives that are beneficial to the company. And I think great product leaders are good at product strategy and define it very crisply versus thinking about it more in abstract terms.
Yeah, that's a great point as well. And it's something I've been thinking about recently is, there's a lot of use of buzzwords in product. Like MVP is a word that I think has become, we won't even go into
absolutely
misused strategy as well. People throw the word around, but then you look at what they're doing. It's like, well, it's not clear really where the strategy is in this. We're just doing a long list of things essentially. How, because I know, for example, you were involved at Reforge. How do you approach the teaching of strategy out of interest there?
Yeah, so this fall I taught the live sessions for a course on product strategy. It was actually the first cohort of the product strategy course at Reforge. It was a 6-week course divided into 6 modules. So the first 3 modules were focused on strategic levers that product managers have at their disposal. The 3 levers that we covered are feature strategy, growth strategy, and product market fit expansion strategy. And one of the things I think is really important there is that as product management evolves as a profession, we're starting to see specialization around not particular domains like B2C, B2B, but really particular aspects of how you manage products. You know, there's certain product managers that are great at getting a product from you know, one stage of product market fit to growing it, and so they're more growth oriented. There's others that are really good about figuring out, you know, what is product market fit initially. There's others that are good about thinking about strategically, once you have product market fit, where do you go from here? And so the ability to think about different types of product work, I think, is really important. That's the first thing that we covered within the course, is those 3 different strategic levers that product managers have in a post product market fit company. And then the 3 other things that we talked about were product enablers, which are the things that product managers need to use in order to execute on those levers. The first one being organizational management. Second one being scaling work. So how do you actually think about removing the roadblocks that are in the way of a particular company? And, you know, that could be tech scaling or process scaling, or scaling in terms of being able to deal with a larger number of users. And then the third piece is portfolio management, which is when you step back from an array of different products and features, how do you think about the overall portfolio of bets that you have as a product leader, and make sure that the company does have a balanced portfolio in terms of the right amount of growth bets, the right amount of innovation bets, those sorts of things.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Something I should probably sign up for myself now that I'm teaching.
It was a great course. And then, you know, to your specific question about how do you teach it, there's very in-depth content each week. And then one of the most exciting things is that we do live cases with product leaders. So we have each week, we have a series of guests who deep dive into an experience from their product management career, where they had to deal with a particular topic of that week. And so it's very hands-on, and it's a 2-way case where we actually ask the participants to go through the case as if they were in that leader's shoes.
Yeah, that's great. No, because I mean, that's a challenge I have with, you know, my product, the Prod MBA, is how do you give experiential learning? Because you can do these nice case studies on strategy, you can explain what it is, but unless somebody really understands, like, what were the implications of me going in this direction versus this other one, and what was the feedback, then it's very difficult for them to deeply understand it, to really internalize it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Sounds really interesting.
And there's been a lot of work on the case method. Harvard Business School uses it to great effect. And I think that works really nicely to actually, you know, replicate the idea of moving through experiential learning.
Oh, nice, cool. I mean, I'll link that as well in the show notes when I post this publicly, by the way.
Perfect.
I did have a look at it. It looks like a really interesting course. On that, before we come on to the topic of, you know, I really want to talk about peak product management, which I know is something that's close to your heart, in a second. You know, one thing that I see a lot is, again, more so in Europe, is there are fewer product-led companies here. So there are fewer companies where, for example, if you want to get into product management, right, from scratch, let's say in the US, the path may be that you go to something like product school, and then you get taught the fundamentals, then you go into a company like Facebook, right, where you're in a product-led organization, you're learning, you know, all of these concepts that we read about in theory, you're sort of doing those in practice, or should be. There's an environment there for that. A challenge that I constantly find, and, you know, one of the reasons we designed the product MBA in a certain way, is that many product managers are not in organizations where they're able to enact things like product strategy, or things like, okay, how do you leverage customer insight effectively, because they're in sales-led organizations or just traditional organizations. What advice would you give, or what actions could you give to, let's say, a junior or mid-level product manager looking to bridge that gap to, you know, the skill set they're going to need as a leader when they may not be in the right environment?
I think the first thing is to really shift your perspective. all companies are product-driven companies. Ultimately, companies make money by providing a product to a set of customers, and that transaction is vitally important. Certain companies in certain positions get divorced from that fact, and get sort of stagnant, and cease to really think about the customer and the product at the forefront of their strategy. I think in the past, those companies have been able to exist for a long time, and kind of protect the monopoly or protect the position that they have. But increasingly, even somewhat staid industries that do think about themselves somewhat differently than the customer are starting to get disrupted. We're seeing that in banking, we're seeing that in healthcare, and in various parts of fintech and insurance. And so, regardless of what company you're at, whether it's at a startup that really thinks about itself as product driven, or you're at a larger company where the company is somewhat divorced from the importance of the product, I think the person in that position can shift their mindset and really try to bring the company back to basics, and think in a customer first way. And as a result, I believe influence the direction, the strategy of the company in the right direction, one in which that really takes care of its customers. And even if, depending on where you are in the organization, it's hard for you to kind of shift the mindset of the company. You can at least shift your own mindset and start to work in that way, and I think improve your product work as a result. So I think that's the first thing, which is partly like a mindset thing. I think the second thing is to make sure that you're spending a lot of time in and around people who are at more product-driven companies, whether that's through things like Reforge or the Product MBA, or other things like that, or even just in communities. There's an increasing number of online communities. There are great product management communities. There's ones that specialize in different types of product management, marketplaces, fintech. So even if you can't get enough of that through osmosis in your day-to-day based on the company that you're in and the people you're around, you can seek to do that after work hours and level up as a product manager in that way.
Yeah, that's great advice. I loved as well, actually, that phrasing, divorced from product. And, you're emphasizing the fact that everybody, was at some point product-led organization, right? That's how you got the initial sale. Rather than, I've always thought of it as, it's just these sort of old school companies where they never got anything right. But clearly they did at some point. Great points there. So I think, as you said, just to recap that, being around the right people and, just shifting your mindset there. Let's talk.
It's getting a little bit noisy here. Sorry, I'm in the middle of. I've got workers here. Let me move. See if I can get to somewhere quieter.
It's fine actually from my side.
It's okay.
Yeah,
okay.
From my side. No, Doran's tiny perfect in the background. Not a problem. Let's talk about peak product management, because we've had conversations before. I love this concept, and I love the concept of the 4 product competencies. So, what is a peak product manager?
Yeah, I think a peak product manager is someone who understands holistically what is required of being a product leader, and shifts their mindset from thinking about their role as shipping features to delivering business outcomes. Because ultimately, as we were talking about before, product is really a lever for company strategy, and it is regardless of whether the company puts that at the forefront or not. And really great peak product managers understand that, and they orient their work so that it is as beneficial as possible to the overall company strategy, and it drives business impact. In order to drive business impact as part of this peak product manager framework, I was thinking many years ago about what are the competencies that a product manager and a product leader need to have, and is there sort of a unified theory of what those competencies are that start from APM and then work all the way up to chief product officer. So as part of this framework, I defined 12 competencies organized into 4 different areas. This was a model that I started using at TripAdvisor. It's a model I've used in other contexts as well. And the 4 areas of competency, the first is product execution, the second is customer insight, the third is product strategy, and then the fourth is influencing people. And within each of those different areas, and I can dig into them in more detail, there's 3 competencies that define what does that area mean. All 12 competencies are important, from the time you start as an APM, but the relative weight between the 2 competencies changes over time. And so before we were talking about what is the difference between a product manager and a product leader, I think, if you think about this in terms of that competency framework, as people become more senior in their organizations, they sort of work themselves clockwise around the competencies. I've organized it into a spider chart. And so in the top left hand is product execution, and the top right is customer insight. Early on in a product manager's career, they really do focus on being able to execute, so deliver great product, and then being able to understand what customers want so that they can make sure that the product that they're delivering does suit the needs of the customer or does fulfill the needs of the customer. And then the bottom hemisphere of the competencies is product strategy and influencing people. And so as a person transitions from product manager to product leader, they spend less time on execution and customer insight and more time on strategy and more time on people. And so the relative shift in terms of the competencies changes over time.
Yeah, understood. How do you, I think one thing that's, maybe not clear to people as well is that you mentioned this concept of like having a shape as a product manager, right? Where it's not about, you don't have to be the best at everything. You can pick the kinds of things that you start specializing in. I suppose the question is like, how do you feel people can best do that? Is it based off past experience, for example? Is it proactively skilling up in certain areas?
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to identify their strengths as a first step. I think in work culture in general, always thinking about, well, what's my weakness? What's the thing that's holding me back? And what do I need to spend time, what gaps do I need to spend time filling? And truly great leaders and truly great products are not a result of filling gaps. They're a result of accentuating strengths. And so really important, I think, for managers, for employees to think about, what is the strength that we as a team have, that this individual has, and then to give the person the support that they need to both accentuate that strength and to complement themselves with people that might be strong in other areas. And I think the classic example, especially at the IC level, is you may have a very design-driven PM on one side, and you might have a very analytical PM on the other side. And so if you spend all day long trying to get the design-driven PM to be more analytical and get the analytical PM to be more design-driven, you're going to actually be tapping into both people's limitations and not tapping into the strengths, the inherent talents that they have. So instead, build a really good team where you put those people together and where you allow the design-driven PM to really leverage that talent, and you allow the analytical PM to really leverage that talent. And so I think ultimately, one of the rules of thumb is that individuals should be spiky and teams should be well-rounded. And so that really goes to the heart of, each person's like a puzzle piece. They're going to have things that they're really great at. So allow them to be great at those things and then put them together with people who are complementary. So they'll, as you put the pieces together, you get a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I see common conversation. I don't know if you have this. Managers, there's sort of anxiety, imposter syndrome around not being technical. And my point is always, well, it depends on the role. But actually, my experience is the best product managers are the ones that are very strategic or just very good at saying, everything's a bit messy. Like, come on, guys, like we're going to navigate it in this way. And I think again, it stems from the fact that because there's no formal path. I mean, there will be in the next couple of years. There's more training programs appearing, but because there's no sort of clear path to say like you are at this level and then the next level and the next level. If you're outside of large organizations, large product-led organization, people start to focus on the wrong things and worry about the wrong things, which is a shame, right? And I think,
absolutely,
work that you do and I do tries to write that and tries to give people a bit of a path forward. I love that point as well about accentuating strength. I think that's, if people take one thing away today, both in terms of like your personal development, focus on what you're good at, forget everything else, or at least, don't worry so much about it. Also as a product, I talk a lot about focus on your product vision first, look at the competition, see what they're up to, right? See that you're not just doing something that has, someone else has already done, but just get really, really good at one or two things and you will get customers that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a great rule of thumb for both products and product leaders. Ultimately, you get success when you have something that's uniquely good, not when you have something that's well-rounded or, overall average.
Yeah. Yeah. A bit of a pick and mix. I think that is a great place to finish. It's been a real pleasure, Ravi. Mehta, thank you so much for being on. I think really, really insightful. I've been writing a load of notes as well. I'm going to have another listen to this, I think, next week. Just make sure I've got
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. So if anyone wants to learn more from Ravi Mehta, I'll be linking the article on the product competencies and peak product management. I'll also link through to the Reforge product strategy course that you were involved with as well. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.